Hi everyone, this is Shaylin with part 2 of painting this Lord of the Rings inspired silk scarf. You can see I've got Hobbiton and Rivendell here, and then these gorgeous constellations up the middle, and in this video you'll see the actual process of painting all of these designs. In the first video I shared some of the setting up process, including creating the designs using this resist. It creates white lines and little traps for the color to stay in, since the dye wants to spread everywhere. The dye that I'm using is Cetasilk brand that I bought from Dharma Trading Company, and you can see that my process of color mixing is not super scientific. I'm just adding a couple drops of dye to a container of water until I get the color and consistency that I like. And for the actual application, I just use an old paintbrush and paint on the color. The color will spread fairly far, so this is why I need to have the resist there in order to create boundaries for the paint as it continues to spread. The color also will lose a lot of the saturation and vibrancy as it dries. You can see that the dye is fairly watered down, and that's discoloring the silk until it dries. And since this is chiffon silk and so see-through, you really lose some of the color. So I'm going a little bit darker than what I want the final illustration to look like. And you'll see later on in the process that it gets quite a bit paler. Now I'm setting up to paint the other end of the silk. You can see I've protected all my surfaces with drop cloths and plastic, and I've prepared all the different colors. In order to make sure that there's some consistency, I used the exact same colors that I used on the Hobbiton side and just added in a couple of purples and blues for this part of the Rivendell illustration. You can see here I'm just starting to paint in the cliffs, and I'm just going to let the time lapse play here for a moment. You can see the process. The center of the silk is decorated with some constellations that I drew in resist, and I'm getting ready to color it in the night sky color. I'm lightly saturating the scarf with sprayed dye in pale blue, and then beginning to lay down my base of color. You need to be careful not to scrub too hard with the dye or it will tear up the resist. And this is one of the reasons why I sprayed the scarf first, because when it's saturated the color spreads better. Once I've got some more purples and blues on, I take some salt, I'm just using kosher salt from the kitchen here, and sprinkling it onto the scarf. The salt, this is a technique that I learned from watercolors. The salt will start to soak up some of the pigment and creates this really beautiful speckled effect. And I'm complementing that speckled effect by just literally sprinkling some dye on. Now the scarf is beginning to dry. You can see that the colors have gotten quite paler, and a lot of the pigment is sitting at the edges of the color holds where I drew the resist lines. It's not quite finished yet. I'm going to be adding additional color after this first layer is dried so I can judge a bit better. Now it's nighttime, and I'm removing the salt from the surface of the scarf, and you can see where things stand right now as far as the painting process goes. Now I'm just adding some more details. I normally don't work with the scarf upright because the colors will spread far too much, but for adding some of the detail I find this a much easier way to work. I drew all of this completely sideways, so it was pretty nice to be able to put the frame upright and see what the illustration looks like straight on. It was pretty helpful there. Here you can see how the dye just starts to spill over the edge a bit when you work upright. Just adding in some further details. and then working on the Rivendell side. Now I'm removing the scarf from the frame. Everything's going to be a little bit stiff and the color is not yet fully set. So the next step will be ironing. And what the ironing does is it heat sets the color without ruining the resist, and then I will later wash the resist out. Ironing takes a long time. You have to hit each section for about 3 to 5 minutes at a fairly high temperature to set the color. Now I'm just gently wringing out the resist. I don't want to take the color out, even though it's heat set. You can still get a little bit of it to wash out. And here's the finished scarf. I hope that you've enjoyed both of these videos with the process of painting this Lord of the Rings silk scarf. And behind the scenes, my little sister took this on my phone, so you can see what my camera setup is like. I'm literally leaning around the camera. It was quite difficult at times. That's
Would
fun.
you like me to...
Is it still recording?
Yeah.
Here, come here, Addie.
What? No. My hair.
No way?
No.
Get in here.
Nope.